The galaxy had grown used to silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of empires that once roared and now lay in ruin. The Valak, the Zaith, the Dravani, civilizations that once stretched across spiral arms, were reduced to scattered fleets and drifting monuments of steel. They had not fallen to war among themselves, nor to plague or famine. They had fallen to something they could not comprehend: humanity. For centuries, humans were the forgotten ones, born on a pale world in the shadows of the Orion Spur, overlooked by greater empires. They were judged fragile, reckless, too quick to bleed, and too stubborn to bow. The elder races saw no threat in their restless colonies, no challenge in their wandering fleets. To them, humanity was just another primitive spark destined to fade in the winds of the stars. But sparks, when pressed, could ignite. It began on the shattered moon of Kalis, where an empire's arrogance collided with humanity's refusal to kneel. The Valak fleet descended, confident in their weapons forged from centuries of dominance. They demanded surrender, tribute, silence. Instead, they found themselves facing men and women who had no fear left to give. Farmers with stolen rifles, engineers who turned mining lasers into weapons, children who carried messages across broken battlefields. The Valak crushed them, again and again. And still, the humans returned. They fight like they do not know what death means, one Valak commander whispered before his cruiser was boarded and seized by those same mortals. It was not technology that gave humans victory. Their ships were smaller, their weapons crude, their fleets fractured. But they were relentless. Where empires weighed battles in profit and losses, humans measured them in survival and memory. For every world burned, a dozen more voices rose to avenge it. For every city lost, new alliances were forged in the ruins. No one remembered the exact moment the tide shifted. Perhaps it was when the Valak flagship was dragged from the skies of Kalis by nothing more than steel cables and human fury, or when the Dravani homeworld burned because they underestimated a species that builds war from scraps. Perhaps it was simply the moment the galaxy realized that humanity did not surrender. Not ever. Legends began to form. Tales whispered of Captain Elias, who stood on the deck of a burning ship and declared, "If we are ashes, then let us burn brighter than their suns." Stories of Arya, the medic who saved hundreds on the battlefield, carrying wounded strangers as though they were her kin. Stories of nameless soldiers who charged against impossible odds, not for glory, but for the child hiding in the cellar, the colony waiting for tomorrow, the promise of a dawn they refused to abandon. The alien empires, fractured and weary from their own arrogance, could not withstand it. Their fleets were dismantled, their rulers dethroned, their monuments left hollow. The galaxy trembled, and humanity, once overlooked, now stood in the center of the storm. But victory carried more than triumph. It carried scars, deep, invisible scars. Families shattered, worlds ruined beyond repair, heroes remembered in silence. Humanity had risen not out of conquest but out of desperation, and now the question lingered in every survivor's heart. What do we become now that we have defeated those who sought to destroy us? The galaxy's silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of fading empires. It was the silence before something greater, something uncertain. And in that silence, humanity's story was only beginning. The war that crowned humanity in legend did not end with cheers or banners. It ended in the silence of broken worlds. From orbit, the surface of Kalis looked like a wound. Its seas choked with ash, its forests burned into lifeless silhouettes. Humanity had won, yes, but victory was not the same as peace. On the shattered plain stood Elias, Captain Elias as the soldiers called him, though he carried the title like a burden more than a badge. His armor bore the scars of countless battles, and his voice had become the voice of a people unwilling to fall. Yet in the quiet after the storm, he felt only the weight of those who never returned. At his side walked Arya. She carried no weapon, yet her hands had saved more lives than any rifle. The medic's eyes seemed older than her years, etched with the memory of every cry she had soothed, every wound she had bandaged, every name she whispered into the void. She said little, but her silence carried more truth than any speech. Together they walked the ruins of a Valak stronghold. The alien walls, once proud and glowing with symbols of dominion, now lay crumbled and scorched. Children picked through rubble, searching for keepsakes of the world they had lost. Farmers gathered shards of alloy, already imagining how they might be repurposed into plows, into roofs, into anything useful. Humans did not mourn forever. They rebuilt. That was their gift and their curse. News came from the stars. Broken empires, scattered fleets, alien warlords fighting for scraps of power. The Valak were fractured beyond repair. The Zaith were retreating into the dark corners of the spiral arm. The Dravani fleets were burning each other in civil war. But even as their enemies tore themselves apart, the humans did not rest. Why? Arya asked Elias one night as they sat before a makeshift fire. The stars above them glittered cold, unfeeling, reminders of how small their world still was. We've fought. We've bled. We've won. Why not stop? Elias did not answer at once. His eyes traced the scarred horizon, the skeletal remains of towers that once touched the clouds. Finally, he said, because they will come again. If not the Valak, then something else. The galaxy does not forgive weakness, and we cannot afford to be prey. Arya looked into the flames. She did not argue. She had seen enough to know he was right. But she also knew that every battle carved another piece from the souls of their people. Still, humanity pushed forward. They took the broken ships of their enemies and made them their own. They studied alien technology not with reverence but with hunger. Where others saw mysteries, humans saw puzzles to be solved. A Valak war engine became the seed of a new starship. A Dravani plasma forge became the foundation of human industry. Nothing was wasted, nothing sacred. The galaxy began to whisper in fear. Relentless. The word spread through alien tongues. The humans are relentless. But within the heart of humanity, questions remained. Were they builders or only destroyers wearing the mask of survivors? Could they create a future that was more than vengeance wrapped in steel? One evening, a convoy of refugees arrived at Kalis. They were not human. They were Zaith, thin and luminous, their crystalline skin fractured with hunger and grief. Their empire had fallen, their fleets destroyed. Now they came with nothing but hope. The human soldiers raised their rifles. The memory of war burned hot in their veins, but Arya stepped forward, lowering her hands to show peace. These are not our enemies, she said softly. They are what we were. Lost, desperate, searching for tomorrow. For a moment the air trembled with tension. Then Elias gave the order. Let them in. And so, in the ashes of shattered empires, something new began. Not conquest, not vengeance, but the fragile beginnings of unity, born not of power but of survival. Yet even as humans reached out a hand to those they once called enemies, the galaxy beyond stirred with shadows. Broken empires breed desperate rulers, and desperate rulers do not forgive. The fire of humanity burned, but shadows were gathering around it. The galaxy never allowed a fire to burn without trying to smother it. Humanity's rise had shaken the stars, and though empires crumbled, not all rulers were content to vanish into silence. In the dark reaches of the Rim, remnants of the Dravani gathered. Their fleets were fractured, their rulers dethroned, yet ambition still smoldered. From hidden strongholds they whispered of vengeance. The Dravani had once ruled by fear, and though their empire was broken, fear could still be wielded as a weapon. Elias knew this. Standing on the bridge of the Resolute, the first great starship born from human and alien technology combined, he stared at the map of known space. Lines of fire traced human victories, but scattered across the edges were warnings. Flashes of violence, fleets disappearing, colonies falling silent. They're circling, Elias muttered. Arya, who had joined him on the bridge, glanced at the glowing display. Her hands were folded tightly, as though she were holding together the fragile thread of hope she carried. You speak as if they are beasts. They are, Elias replied, his voice flat. Wounded beasts. Dangerous beasts. He turned his gaze from the stars to her. And wounded beasts strike hardest when cornered. Arya said nothing. She had seen too many wounds already, both alien and human. She wondered if perhaps they were all beasts now, driven by hunger and fear. Far from the Resolute on the colony of Meridia, humanity's new fire was being tested. Meridia had been nothing more than a mining world, its soil poor, its skies scarred by endless storms. Yet the humans rebuilt it into a fortress. Steel towers rose where forests once stood, and children laughed in the shadow of cannons aimed at the stars. But with growth came attention. The Dravani raiders descended like vultures, their sleek ships cutting through the storms, their weapons eager for blood. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They found neither. When the alarm rang across Meridia, men and women who had once been miners, farmers, teachers, stood shoulder to shoulder in defense of their home. They were not soldiers, yet their resolve was steel. From the walls of the fortress, rifles fired into the night sky. From hidden bunkers, missiles launched in arcs of fire. Even children carried messages, fearless in the storm of war. And when the Dravani broke through, when alien boots touched human soil, they found themselves met not by panic, but by determination. "Hold the line," cried Commander Rin, a young officer barely older than the soldiers she led. Her voice was raw, but it carried like thunder through the storm. The battle raged for hours. The Dravani pressed hard, their blades and plasma cutting deep, but the humans refused to yield. Every fallen defender was replaced by another. Every breach was sealed with sacrifice. At dawn, when the storm clouds finally parted, the Dravani retreated. Their ships limped away, scarred and burning. Meridia stood. The news spread across human colonies like wildfire. Humanity had not just survived, they had defended, held, and triumphed without their great captains, without their legends. Ordinary men and women had become something greater in the fire. Elias read the reports in silence. Pride filled his chest, but with it came unease. Victories created legends, but legends drew enemies. He knew the Dravani would not forget their humiliation. "Each battle we win," he murmured, "the galaxy learns to fear us more, and the more they fear, the harder they will strike." Arya, standing behind him, laid a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was soft, grounding. "Then let them strike. We will not be broken." But in her heart, even she felt the tremor of doubt. She had seen the endless hunger of vengeance. She knew it never slept, and deep within the stars, the Dravani warlords gathered. They spoke of fire and ruin. They spoke of uniting the broken shards of empire into a blade sharp enough to cut through humanity's rising light. The shadow was no longer gathering. It was preparing to fall. The galaxy darkened. From the fractured fragments of the Dravani Empire, a warlord rose, Kalor the Unbroken. His name carried like poison through the void. Once a commander of fleets, now a king of ruins, Kalor had bound shattered legions with iron will and bitter promises. Where others saw defeat, he saw opportunity. Humanity's rise had left scars across his people, and from those scars he forged a weapon. "They are not gods," Kalor told his followers. "They bleed, they die. They build their strength from scraps, from weakness. We will show them what it means to face true power." From hidden shipyards his fleet emerged, sleek warships reborn from the husks of fallen empires, armed with weapons stolen, traded, or built from desperation. Thousands of vessels bound under one banner of vengeance. The storm had gathered. Now it moved. Human colonies across the rim began to fall silent. Outposts once bright with signals dimmed into void. Convoys vanished into the black. Refugees fled in fractured ships, whispering of fire that consumed everything in its path. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elias listened to their voices. His jaw was clenched, his hands tight on the railing. The war he had feared had come. "They are not raiders anymore," he said grimly. "This is not hunger. This is war." Advisors argued for retreat. Others begged for diplomacy. But Elias shook his head. "You cannot reason with a storm. You can only withstand it or break it." Arya stood beside him, her face pale but her eyes burning with quiet fire. "Then we must hold, no matter what it costs." The cost came swiftly. The first great clash erupted above Meridian Prime, a jewel among the stars. Human fleets rose to meet Kalor's armada, their ships still scarred from the last war, their captains still learning the weight of command. The void burned as beams of plasma carved through steel, as missiles bloomed like fiery flowers in the dark. Elias led from the front, his voice steady across the comms. "We do not falter. We do not yield. If we fall, humanity falls. Stand." For hours the battle raged. Human ships fought like wolves, darting, striking, refusing to surrender the skies. Kalor's forces pressed harder, confident in their numbers, ruthless in their intent. Then the Resolute was struck. The impact tore through the ship, fire and smoke filling its halls. Crew screamed. Alarms wailed, yet the bridge held. Elias, blood on his brow, rose from the floor and barked orders as though the flames themselves would obey him. Arya moved through the chaos, her hands steady, her voice calm as she tended the wounded, as though the fire around them could not touch her resolve. But even their courage could not change the tide. The human fleet was breaking. Ship after ship fell silent, their wreckage drifting among the stars. Meridian Prime itself trembled as Kalor's forces descended upon its surface. On the ground, Commander Rin led the defense. Her soldiers fought street by street, building by building, their rifles blazing against towering war machines. Every moment bought was a moment for civilians to flee, for children to escape the fire. "Hold the line," Rin shouted, her voice hoarse, her uniform torn, her heart unyielding. "If we fall here, we fall everywhere." Above, Elias gave the order none wanted to hear. "Retreat. Save who we can. This battle is lost," the words cut deeper than any wound. But humanity obeyed because survival was not surrender. It was the seed of tomorrow. Meridian Prime burned. The human fleet scattered. Kalor stood victorious, his banner of vengeance raised high. But in the ashes of defeat, legends were not extinguished. In the silent corners of space, survivors whispered of Elias, who stood bloodied but unbroken. Of Arya, who healed the wounded even as fire consumed the walls around her. Of Rin, who led her soldiers into the storm knowing they would not return, yet never once allowed fear to claim them. The storm had broken against humanity. But the fire of humanity still burned, and in that fire the will to rise again was already alive. Meridian Prime was gone, its towers reduced to embers, its oceans scarred by fire. Survivors scattered into the void, carrying the weight of ashes in their eyes. Kalor's banner of vengeance now blazed across the rim, and the galaxy whispered that humanity had finally met its end. But humanity did not end. On the hidden colony of Arendor, where mountains pierced the sky and valleys cradled rivers like veins of silver, the scattered remnants gathered. The Resolute, broken but not dead, limped into orbit, her hull scorched, her crew weary. From her deck stepped Elias, his face hardened by defeat, his spirit unbroken. He stood before the survivors, men and women who had lost everything, who carried wounds too deep for words. His voice rose rough but resolute. "We were struck down. We were scattered. They think this is the end of us." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the weary crowd. "But they do not understand who we are. We are humanity. We are not measured by the battles we lose, but by the fires we carry within us. And that fire does not die." Silence held for a moment. Then it broke into murmurs, then into shouts, and finally into a roar. In that roar, hope flickered back to life. Arya moved among them, tending to the wounded, speaking quietly to children, listening to those who had lost too much to carry alone. She was no warrior, yet her presence was a reminder that even in ruin, there was still compassion, still humanity. Commander Rin, scarred but alive, approached Elias. "We cannot face Kalor's fleet as we are," she said. "We don't have the numbers. We don't have the strength." Elias met her gaze, his own steady. "Then we will fight differently." He wields fear as a weapon. "We will wield something greater." "What?" she asked. "Resolve," Elias answered, "and the fire that makes us human." From that day, the survivors did not wait for salvation. They became it. Old shipyards, once abandoned, were reignited with life. Engineers stripped the wreckage of fallen Dravani warships and rebuilt them with human ingenuity. Farmers lent their hands, miners their strength, teachers their minds. Humanity did not separate soldiers from civilians. Every soul became part of the war effort. It was not just weapons they built, but unity. The Zaith refugees, once welcomed with suspicion, now stood beside humans, their luminous forms working tirelessly. Together they forged new ships, blending alien precision with human ferocity. Where once there had been distrust, now there was kinship born of shared survival. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Humanity, the fragile species once overlooked, was no longer merely surviving. They were evolving, becoming something greater than empires could comprehend. And then, the first strike came. In the shadow of a nameless moon, a Dravani convoy, 3 warships laden with stolen supplies, vanished. No survivors, no wreckage left behind, only silence. Days later, whispers spread through Kalor's ranks. A fleet of shadows was hunting them. Human ships, smaller and faster than before, armed with weapons cobbled together from scavenged tech, were appearing out of nowhere, striking and vanishing into the dark. Kalor raged. They were broken. I broke them. But the broken had become something sharper. In one daring raid, Elias led the Resolute, still wounded but reborn, into the heart of a Dravani shipyard. Missiles rained down and human boarding crews stormed the docks with nothing but grit and fury. When the battle was done, the shipyard was fire, and the humans were gone, leaving only the echo of their defiance. Each victory was small, but each one lit a spark across the stars. Colonies that had lost hope raised their banners again. Refugees spoke the names of Elias, Arya, and Rin as symbols of defiance. "They fight like they carry the fire of suns," whispered one alien merchant after witnessing a human strike. Kaelor's shadow still loomed vast. His armadas still vast and terrible, but now for the first time the galaxy began to doubt his inevitable triumph. Because humanity had remembered who they were. They were not conquerors. They were not subjects. They were survivors who refused to bow. And in their fire, legends were being born anew. The storm was far from over. But the fire within humanity burned brighter than ever. Kaelor's banner stretched across the rim, a shadow vast and heavy. World after world bent beneath his fleets, their skies filled with fire, their people chained by fear. He believed humanity was only a thorn to be plucked, a nuisance that stung but could not truly wound. He was wrong. For even as Kaelor's armadas swept outward, a quiet storm was gathering against him. Humanity, once fractured, now moved as one. Their fleets no longer limped in isolation but struck with precision and purpose. Their allies, the luminous Zaith, the remnants of Valak deserters, even fragments of lesser species once oppressed by empires, flocked to their side. Not because humanity promised conquest, but because humanity promised hope. On Arendor, the cradle of this rebirth, Elias stood before a new fleet. Ships of human steel and alien alloy gleamed in the starlight. Warriors born from scraps, but fierce, unyielding. "They think us weak," Elias spoke, his voice carrying across comms to every pilot, every soldier, every soul. "They think us fragile, but we are not defined by what we have lost. We are defined by what we will never surrender. Today we rise, not for vengeance, not for conquest, but for the right to live free beneath the stars." Cheers erupted, not from soldiers alone, but from refugees, from builders, from all who had poured their spirit into this reborn fleet. Humanity's strength was not in numbers nor in technology, but in the fire that bound them together. The first great strike of this new unity came at the Battle of Calros Gate. Kaelor's forces held the system, using it as a choke point to sever human colonies from one another. It was a fortress of impossible design, yet humanity dared. The Resolute led the charge, her scarred hull now bearing marks of pride rather than weakness. Flanking her were Zaith ships, crystalline hulls glowing with refracted light, weaving between human warcraft and dazzling arcs. The battle was chaos. Kaelor's fleet unleashed firestorms, filling the void with destruction, but humanity did not fight in straight lines. They darted, adapted, improvised. A mining vessel, once dismissed as useless, rammed a Dravani cruiser, detonating its own fuel cells in sacrifice. Fighter wings, low on munitions, used debris itself as weapons, hurling fragments of broken hulls into enemy engines. Commander Rin, aboard the frigate Valor's Edge, barked orders through the din. "Cut their formation. Don't meet their strength. Break their order." Her plan worked. Kaelor's discipline, forged in conquest, faltered before human unpredictability. What he saw as chaos was, in truth, humanity's greatest weapon: creativity in the face of annihilation. At the height of the battle, Elias himself led a boarding action onto Kaelor's command dreadnought. The corridors burned, filled with smoke and screams. Humans pressed forward, rifles hot, blades drawn when bullets ran dry. Kaelor was not there. He had withdrawn, leaving his captains to bleed. But the message was clear. Humanity would not cower in shadows. They would come for him even to the heart of his fortress. When the dust cleared, Calros Gate was free. Humanity had not merely survived. They had struck at the very arteries of Kaelor's war machine. The galaxy stirred. Whispers spread like wildfire. The humans fight with madness. The humans cannot be predicted. The humans do not know how to stop. Worlds that had once hidden their banners now rose, emboldened by the fire they saw in humanity. Refugees became allies, allies became warriors. Even Kaelor's own ranks began to splinter. Whispers of doubt creeping among captains who had once obeyed without question. Arya, moving among the wounded after Calros, saw what Elias himself did not. She saw eyes filled not only with resolve but with exhaustion. She saw children clutching weapons too heavy for their hands, faces aged beyond their years. That night, as the fleet regrouped, she stood before Elias. "We are winning," she admitted, "but at a cost. How many more can we lose before victory itself becomes hollow?" Elias looked at her for a long time. His voice was quiet when he answered, "As many as it takes. Because if we fall now, there will be no tomorrow at all." Arya did not argue. She only prayed that when tomorrow came, humanity would still recognize itself in the mirror. The tide had turned. Humanity had risen. But Kalor was not finished. His fury burned brighter than ever, and in the darkness of the rim he prepared his final blow. The greatest storm of all was yet to come. Kalor the Unbroken did not retreat. He gathered. From every shattered corner of the rim he pulled ships, mercenaries, desperate warlords clinging to the hope of vengeance. His fleet became a storm unlike any the stars had seen since the height of the great empires. He spoke with fire, promising his followers not just victory but the annihilation of humanity itself. "They rise like fire," Kalor roared before his armada. "But fire burns out. We will drown them in the void and their name will be forgotten." Humanity heard those words, and they did not tremble. The fleet gathered at Arendor, the heart of their rebirth, the cradle of their fire. Elias stood on the bridge of the Resolute, scarred but proud, her hull patched with 100 battles, her crew hardened by loss and hope alike. "All of us stand together," Elias spoke across comms to every ally, human and otherwise. "Not for conquest, not for glory, but for tomorrow. If we fall today, the galaxy falls into shadow. If we rise, then no chain will ever bind us again. Let this be the day they learn. We are relentless." The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. Then Kalor's armada fell upon them. The battle that followed was not war. It was legend. The void blazed with fire. Human ships darted between colossal Dravani dreadnoughts, striking with impossible precision. Zaith vessels wove radiant patterns of light, shielding allies and breaking enemy formations. The Resolute charged through the heart of the storm, her cannons roaring like thunder. Kalor's dreadnought, vast as a floating city, loomed above all, its weapons cutting swathes through fleets, its presence a shadow of despair. Yet humanity did not falter. On the ground, as Kalor's forces attempted landfall on Arendor, Commander Rin led the defense once more. Her voice rang across the comms. "Every step they take, they will pay for. This is our world, this is our fire." Streets turned to fortresses, mountains into strongholds. Civilians fought beside soldiers, their courage unshaken. Arya moved through the chaos like light in the dark. She tended wounds in the middle of firestorms, pulled children from rubble, and whispered hope into ears that had nearly given up. She carried no weapon, yet those who saw her swore she was the strongest warrior of all. And then, at the heart of the storm, Elias faced Kalor. The Resolute rammed into Kalor's dreadnought, boarding bridges locking into place. Elias led the charge, rifle in hand, blade at his side. The corridors burned, alien steel shattering beneath human fury. At the end of the hall stood Kalor, towering, armored, eyes burning with hatred. "You are nothing," Kalor thundered, raising a blade carved from the bones of his enemies. A fleeting spark. Elias, bloodied and unbowed, met his gaze. "Then let us burn brighter than your darkness." The duel was fierce. Steel clashed, plasma scorched, sparks filled the air. Kalor fought with the strength of vengeance, Elias with the strength of every life depending on him. Blow after blow, the deck shook until at last Elias drove his blade through the warlord's chest. Kalor staggered, disbelief in his eyes. "How?" "Because we are human," Elias whispered, "and we do not break." With a final cry, Kalor fell. His fleet, seeing their leader struck down, shattered into chaos. Some fled, some surrendered, others fought to the death. But the storm had broken. Humanity had endured. When the fires finally dimmed, silence returned to the stars. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of victory, hard won. Arendor stood. Humanity stood, and legends were born. Children would speak of Elias, who faced the storm unflinching. They would speak of Arya, who healed where others destroyed, a beacon of compassion amidst ruin. They would speak of Rin, whose voice turned fear into courage. They would speak of nameless men and women, who carried rifles, hammers, or simply hope, and through their sacrifice, built tomorrow. The galaxy would remember humanity not as prey, nor as conquerors, but as something greater, as fire, for fire consumes, fire creates. And fire, once kindled, spreads. From the ashes of shattered empires, humanity rose not to rule but to remind the stars that the smallest spark can ignite eternity. And so, in the quiet after the storm, legends whispered through the void, relentless. The humans are relentless,